1942, Persia. It's when and where the unique story of Wojtek, the brown orphan bear found in Elbrus Mountains, begins. Adopted and raised by soldiers of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company of the Polish Second Corps, he became one of them. Alongside them, he fulfilled his long journey from the Middle East through Monte Cassino, ending up in Scotland. Today I'm talking to the members of Wojtek Memorial Trust, an Edinburgh-based charity. The trust takes care of keeping the unique story alive and spreading the word about it. I asked Aileen Orr, founder of Wojtek Memorial Trust and author of the book titled Wojtek the Bear, Polish War Hero, how it all started.
Well, the idea of the memorial came after I got married because it wasn't until I come back from honeymoon I realised I'd married the man who owned the camp, Winfield Camp. But it was a story I'd known all my life because my grandfather had told me about being with the bear, a Polish bear, in the Middle East. And I was a very small child, so I can't remember the very first time I heard about it. But he told me about this story and how he worked with the Poles. He was a Scottish soldier with the King's Own Scottish Borderers. He was a fitness instructor, so he was tasked with helping to bring the Poles back to fitness. So it was ironic that through all of this, and I had seen, when I was a small child, I'd seen Wojtek at the zoo, and it was ironic that the whole story had come full circle, that I'd married the man who was very much part of this whole story. So the idea came from when my husband introduced me to Katy, who lived in our village, and he started to tell me he was with the bear in the camp, and we started to converse, and it was a very long relationship. And then I met Alan Harriet, who rang me one night. He told me he wanted to do the memorial, and he did, and we've never changed it from that first night that we spoke. So Alan and I have worked very much in hand, and then we knew that we needed a lot of money, so I founded a charity, Wojtek Memorial Trust, and Alan was very much part of that, and a group of us got together to start fundraising, and we're almost there now. But the point about it is it kind of grew bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and now it's life in a quarter in bronze, size in bronze, and it's to be here. It's taken a lot longer, but one of the good things is he will be standing on Polish granite, so he will be standing on Polish soil, which is important.
The story of Wojtek is an unbelievable tale of modern spirit, tackling various important matters, such as history, comradeship, symbolism, and Polish-Scottish friendship. I asked the trustees what does the story mean to them, and how do they perceive it.
Well, I've always been kind of fascinated by history, and I was lucky enough to go and live and work in Poland for 7 years in the 1990s, and found out a lot more about Polish history then that I didn't know when I was growing up, particularly the Polish contribution to the Allied cause in World War II, which is perhaps becoming a little bit better known now, but certainly when I was studying we didn't really learn about it at all. So I see the story of Wojtek. I mean, it's a wonderful story in its own right about the relationship between an animal and soldiers, but it's an entry into the much wider story of the contribution made by so many Polish men and women to fighting for not just their freedom but our freedom in Britain and the freedom of the world during the Second World War. So for me, the Wojtek story is a small part of this much wider story, which I hope that we can bring to greater attention in Scotland, the UK, in Poland, and indeed throughout the world through the work of the Trust. I mean, first of all, it's a great story. It's just it's a story about a bear who becomes a soldier and fights as a soldier. He during his adventures, he trains as a soldier. He drinks. He famously drinks beer. He thinks he's a soldier. He uncovers German spies in the desert. He carries ammunition at the Battle of Monte Cassino. He moves to Scotland. He attends children's parties. He becomes the major attraction at Edinburgh Zoo. There's just so many fascinating parts of the story. It is a great story as it stands by itself. it's also a true story. You couldn't make up a story as weird and as wonderful as this one. So there's an attraction of it as a story. As a father, it's a story. I love telling parts of it to my young children who are sort of half Polish, half British, and it's great that they should understand and learn something about Wojtek, who's a great symbol of Polish, Scottish, and British relationships. But as I sort of mentioned previously, it also it is the entry into the much wider story of Poland's contribution to the Allied cause in the Second World War, which is a story that should be much more widely known and understood, particularly here in the UK. So that for me is why it's very important to tell Wojtek's story, so people get interested in the stories of the men and women who lived alongside him. Well, we shouldn't forget that the Wojtek story is it's in many ways it's a wonderful and a happy story. Because it's about a bear who thinks he's a soldier and who has lots of adventures. But of course the stories of the men and women who lived and fought with him were, unfortunately, in most cases very sad, and in most cases the stories didn't necessarily end with a positive ending because people couldn't go back to their homes or their families. They disappeared. So there is a very important series of stories of the people who lived and worked with him, and I think if we can bring that to wider attention too, we'll have achieved something that's very worthwhile.
Like in any good epic story, Wojtek's tale offers at the same time a mix of happy times and sad moments. There are different levels in the story. You could talk about a bear having an unusual behavior for an animal, acting like a human being, sometimes seen as one. After all, he was a corporal in the Polish army. But you could also talk about his life, and through his life, you would find out what happened to the Polish families during and after the war. Wojtek went to the same places, and like them was forced to stay in Britain. He shared the same fate. Another aspect of the Wojtek story, I believe, is worth telling. Wojtek was a kind of link, a bridge between people. He somehow helped to improve the relationship between the Scottish and the Polish community. The people were intrigued, attracted to the bear. They were fascinated about the bear, and they were talking about the bear. So surely it must have helped a lot of Poles to interact with the locals. Even today, I believe he can still do the job. After all, he was a Persian orphan, adopted as a Pole, who managed to travel through many countries, settled and died in Scotland. I'll be happy to see the statue of Wojtek the Bear right in the heart of Edinburgh, and tell my children about Wojtek the Bear.
The catalogue of pictures and stories, it's so positive. There aren't scare stories of this big nasty growling bear going around scaremongering. It is always, yes, he had to be tamed in certain ways and forms, but just what he stood for, and okay, he drank and smoked, and we can have mixed debate about that, but let's remember the times and just how he played such a great part in right from his early days as a cub, pre-Monte Cassino, coming to Scotland, and even in that latter part in the zoo as well.
The idea really was that this bear that should have been so vicious and so awful was actually tamed by people who had been so brutalised. And that was, my grandfather admired those people who were with the bear for that reason as well, because in theory, they should not have been able to do that. But in fact, they provided a new comrade through the bear, and they were incredibly kind to him, and he returned that affection. He was hope and legs. He was a tangible thing that they could look at and touch and cry with and laugh with. And as long as Wojtek was free, the men in the camp, had some kind of normality. The moment that was actually taken away from him and put in the zoo, then the point was that's how many of the Poles felt themselves, that they had been abandoned, enclosed in a prison, not with bars, but they were in a different country, they were in a strange place, they were devoid of their friends. So in lots of ways, the story of Wojtek mirrored the story of the Poles who had been left behind.
Thousands of miles, I'm thousands of miles from home, helping me find my way.
Such an incredible and educational story needs to be cultivated and cherished. How can we do that, though?
Yeah, well, I suppose let's try and, spread the word as best we can. Try and encourage everyone to understand it. I think it's going to be incredible that, basically roll forward a year, we're going to have this amazing monument and this, icon or this beacon with Wojtek the Bear and the soldier that people can really identify with. And let's try and build from that all the other identities we want to get from it. So if it's our Facebook, our website, Twitter feed, all these different kinds of angles, let's try and spread this word and just build this very big, broad awareness. And then to further that and build on it, the Wojtek Memorial Trust has this longer term, aim to stand for all the good that Wojtek did, which I think brings us on this huge journey for 5-10 years, if not longer. Well, it will be longer, as to what we can really stand for and mean for the community. Whether it's Poles in Scotland, just everyone in Scotland, or everyone from around the world as well that wants to reflect or learn of this story. So let's build our awareness and just spread that word, and let's try and make some good from this as well.
Well, the most important part of this whole project is to pass this whole story on to the next generation of Poles, and as young as possible. But for people who are a bit older, who are students, embrace the fun of Wojtek, and also to have pride in what he did and what the people behind him did. Because the story really is a story of bravery and courage, and they should have great pride in that. And also that celebrate the links with Scotland. It's not just for Polish children, it's for Scottish children and children from all over the world. For instance, I get letters from Japan who are interested in the story. So, it's not exclusively Scottish or Polish. I would like the whole world to celebrate the story of Wojtek, and that's happening now, just naturally by word of mouth. But certainly social media has helped, and so many people are on social media from all over the world talking about Wojtek, and it's like Wojtek, it's taken legs.
So I really hope it helps build and foster strong ties between Poles and the Scots. And one must not forget, this isn't brand new. This has been this is from some time ago, and there are historic strong links, and there have been waves of Poles and Scots working together in various forms and guises going in both directions. And long may that continue, and let's try and build that as best we can. So let's not try and treat them as sort of separate. Let's try and work together on this. And perhaps that's a good example where Wojtek the Bear can sort of bring everybody together.
I think the most important thing is to keep the story alive. Tell the story. People should tell the story to their children, to their grandchildren. Whether they're if you're living in Poland, then I think you should be encouraging your schools to tell the story. It is a great piece of Polish history that as well as being a great story, illustrates Poland's place in the wider world. I think, and the strong connections between Poland and the UK in particular in this case. Also perhaps Italy and even Persia to an extent. But just keep the story alive, keep building it, keep telling it, and that way Wojtek lives on. He lives on in our hearts and our imagination.